Today I have the oral transmission, and I will give you the oral transmission first, then I'll give the teaching on transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment.
Patrul danger jantar dungurin gerwe chogto wogerba tije chimbo yondan shindar dribaka tena ranga de khande digba yana ji jerk zombi yondar jiza chamber shirche de tamba neurum langcha jikte na tang charvi jirlam kirki mang chatsum jobra shat lam ni dungur lamdan kirtsir dang kit balamdan kirtsir lo tangbo la ni kanzo tang damba la temba wo tangbo na Simchin dan Simchin Mayin Ben Sea Nam Shongdi Dengwargi the Shimbajing Jokbala Lokum na Yertim Chamu Jiang Semji Zing Chimbo Kit De Tukun the Shikangla Combat in Pendrova Chunin in Beso the Thursday Pico Bistovam Perete Zigna Kana Parcha Yidma de Andrimbi Girsoni the Devi Korku Yemepa Jivon the Rangolo Kongtrul lan yopa meshiber Patrul Yerkin Kona Nipper Zon Shur Kongtrul Leon Dingurgi Mercy Metan Cheper and Jervayan, there's no other language Shavayan. Nyingma Simson Dingurgi observer Jimson Zuzur Toperto Mamba, the Latrio patient, the Shirgoso, Tiv Shero, Zat on Nadon Lasso be Varsity, Musik Button, not Lasoba Tetra Shonala, Dobada, Shimam Jong or Mercy, Tetra Lamjuki, Varset Kinderman. Tetra lam jupi varchit kiver many barsha wo tetra gumana rangar dungur lam tak chik the mando piblo gabana dungur te shongala gavi lo kepa ni ki jub guba tambo no dungur lam tak chik the mumtum bi number tene yidma gava zere chatam shi kyang guni me kyang nyingmu chevi sirla nipa yangdang yangda jangla te pancha dungur chirtaba shongyang zeri mashto nyamda nimba chakbu Mang the Comber Shajan, Nyang Stop Chirki Pala Flapo, Tela Guba Guni Mepan, Dungur de Jusu Yotna, Maga Sha Magojan, Jusum Mabdamna, Maga Shigan Pamba Mepago, Nyamuk Chirana, Zeri Mafshina, Semtoki, Dungur Chimbo, Young River Tarta, River Tar Yang Chapper, Tsorne Kerslavayan. Zeri Shipi Wungur, Dumur Chungoyang, Yedmuteva, Sora Muzipavnani Shindo, Zupkava Go, Dale Fernam Zimim Sartiglar, Torjipton, Dochak, Garlo Shigan, Narvatam, Zapar Tartar, Dumur Tirdonwa, Namba Yed Chichir Tadne, Zochin Kit Miniba, Wambur Gordon, Mangar Namli, Jongar Tartar, Dumur Tetor, Yishigim, Summer, Muzongar. Lord Narta, Vigile Ransur, Zonaju, cum Gusso, Nipa, Dungur, Jokes Tenia Gav Gombana, Dungur, Lamji Jokes Tenia Gav Gombana, Teon, Dungur, Gan, Shonjung of Loni, Tambi, gave you it on Jigme Shil, Tamke, Dana, Dungur, La Tene, Payon, Ndurtava, Tobo Yoto, Jibatamji, Mount of Samya, Namka, Sergi Var. Yang rang variant rang zibartar the son of Guban Gago.
It's raining again today. Can you close the windows? In order to benefit and liberate all sentient beings, let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let's begin our class on transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment. Both suffering and happiness need to be transformed onto the path of practice. In fact, this is really important to each and every one of us, especially nowadays. When we look at the world, there are so many changes happening. Everything's different, and because of that, there's so much suffering, some of which are quite excruciating. Some are because of the departing of their family members or loss of their family members, some because of loss of job and loss of support for their financial situation. So many different kinds of changes that's happening nowadays. And that change creates suffering. So we really need to have lots of strength comes from determined mind. And this kind of determined mind doesn't come from nowhere. Without which, however, we won't be able to work with the suffering or face them at all. Therefore, we really need to study the ways of transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment. We've talked quite a bit about how samsara is just like a house on fire that is full of suffering. However, this year, I think because many things happened global-wide, and everyone started to have a very refreshing perspective on the suffering of samsara. Whomsoever you are, wherever you are, when all these unimaginable things that happen around you, there are people who can't face them and eventually end up making really irrational choices, doing irrational things. I think it has something to do with the strength of their mind as well as the wisdom. So today, let's continue with the teaching of this text. This text was composed by Tenpe Nyima, the previous great master, whom died in 1926. That's only about 100 years before now. But all the pith instructions he gives in this text, I think, is actually quite profound and poignant for all the sentient beings, especially nowadays. I've read many pith instructions on how to transform suffering and happiness into enlightenment, including Ronsum Pandita, as well as Milarepa's, as well as many masters from Kagyu, same as Mipham Rinpoche's teachings on how to transform sickness and suffering into enlightenment. And each of them, of course, have their very different perspective or aspect on how to transform suffering and happiness into enlightenment. But Tenpe Nyma's teaching is actually quite poignant. It's the pith instruction that is very vivid, especially for today in the 21st century, especially for all the sentient beings nowadays in the year 2020 who are currently going through lots of suffering. While we can recognize the nature of suffering and then learn how to face it and accept it, I think this is quite important for each and every one of us. Unless, of course, there are practitioners who are really wonderful at doing their practice. I think the rest of us are really very similar. Let it be Westerners, Easterners, people of different skin colors, different ethnics. I think the suffering and happiness is really the same. it's very similar. Therefore, we need to learn from this text about how to transform suffering into enlightenment. In fact, each one of us would feel suffering. But because every one of us is so different, every one of our practice, realization, inner insights, all of these are very different. Therefore, the way we face suffering is very different as well. As I talked about last week, there's a book called Anti-Fragile, where it talked about rather how to face situations such as financial crisis. It is not a teaching on Mahayana Buddhism practice, but it's more from the commerce or financial aspect. There are people who are rather quite fragile and they can't face suffering at all. They would completely collapse in front of suffering. That's for weak people who give up very easily and do not stand up in front of suffering. And there are, of course, another group of people who face suffering and obstacles with lots of resilience. Though he may experience pain as well, but he would be able to be very strong and choose or look at other options rather than give up really easily. He would persevere all the way to the end of suffering and live with live through with the determination of his mind or strength of such kind of mind. And for a very rare group of people, not only they can accept such kind of suffering, they not only they do not let suffering to crush them, they try to find opportunities inside all the sufferings. And through such kind of suffering or such kind of opportunity that's provided by suffering, they can then make their life even better or even stronger, even more valuable. I think it really applies for the practitioners as well, these three principles, the principles that's talked above. Of course, we're not studying financial crisis or illness, but we're talking about how we can look at practitioners around us. There are practitioners who are completely crushed by suffering and obstacles. There is a group of practitioners who would use their resilience and the strength of their mind and persevere all the way to the end. And there's a very small group of practitioners. They would seize the opportunity of obstacle and thrive from obstacles. Lots of the teachings taught us, in fact, the enemies are of great help to us. Because without enemies, we won't be able to recognize the nature of our mind. Just like Milarepa, without all the obstacles that he encountered in his life, he won't be able to get enlightened. Another example is some practitioners who got ill, and because of such illness, they attend enlightenment, such as Bhikkhuni Pamo, who we talked about in the 7 practices of training the mind. So there are people who are viewed as unlucky or unfortunate and going through lots of obstacles and so on. However, to that specific person, it may be an opportunity. It may be an opportunity to thrive from whatever obstacles that they were going through, and eventually find some valuable lessons or learn from such and gain valuable lessons from such experience. Therefore, I really hope that each one of our listeners can gain benefit from this teaching, transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment. How can you gain benefit then? I think the theory is very simple. It's not like the very thorough inference that's taught in the Buddhist logics, nor the non-duality and equanimity and one taste of the tantric teaching, esoteric teachings. But the teachings over here is very grounded and really simple to understand. But with such grounded language, it talks about the nature or the secret of our mind. As long as we can understand such profound meaning, especially if we familiarize ourselves with diligence and with lots of devotion and lots of practice, maybe this simple pith instruction can change our life drastically. For example, maybe you think that you don't really have a good fate. Your destiny hadn't been too kind to you. However, after learning this text, you would be able to understand how to transform all the sufferings and obstacles happen in your life, and whatever adversities you would encounter after this, you will be able to work with any situations with lots of confidence. So I think listening to this class and studying this text is in fact quite necessary. So let's continue. Well, yesterday we've talked about first, you have to get rid of the attitude of being entirely unwilling to face any suffering ourselves. And then second, to cultivate the attitude of actually being joyful when suffering arises. So these two are really important. That's where we stopped yesterday. First of all, let's look at dropping the attitude of being entirely unwilling to suffer. I think for many people, many people would think that, how can you do that? Because I don't want suffering. Many people would wish that, please don't let me feel suffering and pain. I would like to have happiness and peace and calm and safety all the time. You could think in such a way, but that's just really wishful thinking. Because due to everyone's different karma, the life and situation happens in your life would be very different, would differ from one and another. So it's really just making, you're just really making an empty wish. You could say as much as you want that, please let me be safe and happy and healthy. You could do that. Of course, you could make such wishes, but is it going to come true? Well, really not necessarily. Just like the young people would go to different temples and monasteries, that's what they would do. There are times, of course, such prayers would work, but not necessarily all of them would work, because everyone's karma, the wind of karma is really strong, just like a flood coming to, just like the flood into a valley. The flood could have carried lots of strength. So whenever your karma ripens. You could pay $10 to the bodhisattvas and ask the bodhisattvas to protect you, but the karma that you've accumulated is from a very long period of time, from lifetimes. Can you resolve that with $10? Well, that's very difficult to say. Just like if a thief tried to bribe a police or the supervisor of the police with $10 and ask them, can you please not lock me up? Well, it's a little bit difficult. That is to say, in fact, all the karma that we've accumulated, in fact, carries lots of strength and lots of force. So it is very difficult to avoid suffering in your life. Even if you go and get ordained to take different vows, lay practitioner vows, and so on, try to avoid suffering. But when the karma is matured, wherever you run to, you cannot escape from such suffering or such matured fruition. So what's the only way out then? From the Mahayana practitioner's point of view or practice point of view, just like when we studied the 7 practices of training the mind, I think this is quite important. It's important to repeatedly to study that, because you cannot only study it for 1 year. You should really familiarize yourself and repeatedly study that, so that slowly will make your mind more malleable, more tamed. Similarly, when you study this teaching, this pith instruction, it will be helpful to your life and practice. What kind of help would it provide? It would help you in such a way that you would realize the mind of rejecting suffering is not of any use. It doesn't matter what kind of suffering or the feeling of rejection or sadness whenever obstacle comes. Simply thinking that I don't want suffering doesn't work. It doesn't provide any solution. When suffering appears, you can think all you want that I don't want you to come. I don't want suffering to come. However, you really can't stop it. You cannot stop flooding. You cannot stop it with any easy ways. There's no easy way out. So what should you do? Of course, if you have different methods, of course you can try to avoid it. In terms of your lifestyle, in terms of through your practice, if you can avoid letting suffering to fall onto your shoulders, of course you can do that, because Mahayana Buddhism is not about taking up unnecessary sufferings. It is good if you can avoid it. But when the suffering is already here or is already coming and you cannot stop it, by only thinking that please don't let me suffer, please don't let any obstacles happen, it doesn't make any changes, it doesn't make any difference, therefore it's not necessary. You will only become more and more weak and more fragile and more upset and more unnecessary. Just like when people get sick, of course it would be wonderful to be healthy, but when you're sick, if you keep thinking that I don't want to get sick, why am I getting sick? Why me? If you keep thinking in such a way, in fact, just simply being upset won't contribute any favorable condition for you to get healthy. Rather, it would make you feel more anxious, more upset, and make your health decline. People would go to hospital, and then if the doctor tells them that they are having late-stage cancer, stage 4 cancer, and some people would say that, well, it's fine. Early stage, late stage, it's fine. And the doctors say, well, you need to take surgery and then chemotherapy. But there are people who, once heard that, they're just completely collapse. They cannot hold this with their mind at all. They cannot face it. That's just really because you don't have big strength in your heart, in your mind. And because of such lack of strength in your mind, then you may have, your condition may even worsen. But if you have strength in your mind, thinking that, well, if I get sick, I get sick, and it's just impermanence. If you have such kind of mentality and such kind of mindset, then at least they won't make your illness worse. This is quite important. People may think that, why me? I think there are people who kept on saying, why me? And this is such a funny way of thinking. There are practitioners, I heard, they would say, why are you coming to me? There's so many other people you could ask for. Just as if a person who committed murder got caught, and then the murderer would say that, why did you catch me? There are so many other people who killed other people, who killed people. Why me? I think this is quite a silly way of thinking, this why me mentality. Therefore, throughout practice, in fact, we've already learned that sentient beings in the three realms, in the three realms, they have to face death, illness, and all different kinds of obstacles sooner or later. We may want to have happiness. We would cry out for happiness. All of those hot terms that's online that says happiness and health. But is it really true? Is that really what you have inside? I think you can really look inside and see for yourselves. So no matter what, if you have a little bit of realization in your mind, you should not let anything to disturb your mind. Just as in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, where it says that whatever things I encounter, I would not abandon a heart or a mind of joyfulness. If suffering is if worrying does not provide a solution, why worry? Because it would even harm all the possibilities of good actions. Just like from the medical point of view, if you get anxious or upset, your immune system would decline and your health would decline as well. So when people get diagnosed with some severe illness and then got notice from hospital right away, they feel terrified and then they get really anxious and upset and depressed. And in such a way, you would encounter even worse health conditions. So we need to have rather a very calm and practice with a mind of equanimity. This is quite important, because once you get weak or once you get beaten down by the obstacles, I think the situation could worsen. The next one, and then it says that you should repeatedly contemplate so that you will have a sense of firm understanding or determination. What does it mean by having this determination? What does it mean by absolute convinced by this? It means that you have to develop certainty. It is whenever suffering occurs in your life or adversity occurs in your life, instead of thinking that, why me, it's so unfortunate, it's so unlucky, instead of thinking of that, you should develop a certainty and do not make a fuss about it, rather have a peace of mind. If you don't know what certainty of if you don't understand what developed certainty is, you should study the torch of certainty, and then you will be able to understand. Then say to yourself, from now on, whatever I have to suffer, I will never become anxious or irritated. Go over this again and again in your mind and summon all your courage and determination. I think this is really important. This is a very important paragraph. There are people who would say that I've never encountered suffering. I'm really happy. I'm really optimistic. I think that's really because you haven't noticed, or maybe there haven't been something that is rather very difficult for you to deal with yet. So you should study this if you want to be able to face different obstacles. Whatever obstacles, some of them could be because of relationships or because of illness, because of slandering, or because of not enough food or enough clothing to keep you warm, or loss of freedom. So there's so many different kinds of sufferings that mundane beings or sentient beings would suffer, such as 8 kinds of or 10 kinds of sufferings, and all the way to immeasurable number of sufferings. So whenever you think about suffering, we should again and again contemplate in your mind, think about that whatever I have to suffer, I will never become anxious or irritated. Instead of feeling that oh, finally class is over, Khenpo is getting so talkative and kept on repeating himself and no longer read the book or listen to the class again, that is not called repeatedly and diligently and wholeheartedly to devote in this teaching. In fact, after today's class, you should read it. Tomorrow, you should read it. Day after, you should study repeatedly every day, and you should diligently practice on it. This kind of rule applies to studying of any new knowledge, so that slowly and slowly the knowledge and the teachings would make a difference in your life. Otherwise, if you only dabble tiny bit on the surface of it and just said, oh, I studied it, I read it, I glimpsed through it, it's okay, I think this kind of mentality is not going to help you in any of practical situations. On top of that, you should practice with great determination and diligence. There are people only say that, well, I should transform suffering to enlightenment, but they're really just saying it in a very superficial way because they haven't really practiced it with lots of determination. If you practice on the great perfection, practicing on impermanence, but you only practice for one session and without any great determination or devotion, then you only have 1 or 2 minutes of sitting practicing Guru Yoga or so. I think it's not really going to help you. Of course, there are people who practice for only as short as 1 or 2 minutes, but they would practice with such great devotion and determination, and from their facial expressions, we can see that they have great devotion. So it is important to practice with great determination. Otherwise, Dharma is Dharma and your mind is your mind. Therefore, you have to practice with great determination and diligence so that you can transform your narrow-mindedness. I think once I read from one of the seven treasures where it says that the mundane beings do not develop the sensitivity for suffering because they don't recognize what suffering is. And it's just like when there's a particle landed on one's hand palm. That's how mundane beings perceive suffering. However, the noble ones have a rather very clear understanding of what suffering is, and they perceive it just as when a small particle landed on their eyeball. There is such kind of metaphor. I think it's just to that. Just like that, mundane beings do not pay attention to the sufferings that happens around their life. They try to avoid seeing it. However, the noble ones would notice all the sufferings that happens in their life so that it would motivate them to practice diligently and with lots of determination. And then eventually their mind would become more open and no longer narrow. In the morning, I had a guest over. He's one of my relatives. I can call him a cousin. He's of the same age of me and maybe a few months younger. We used to herd the yaks when we were young together. He loves fighting. He loves fighting with everybody. And whenever he has anger arose in his heart, it almost seems like he doesn't feel pain at all. So we haven't seen each other for a long time, and I asked him in the morning if he still fight with others. He said, "No, I don't really fight anymore, and now I'm practicing." And I asked him how many times he fought with others. He said maybe over 20 times, sometimes with knife, sometimes with rocks. And he said he really enjoyed fighting with others, or really prone to fight with others. Now, after he relied on his teacher, he realized that he get angry too much, and it is not a good thing. And so I asked him, what if people hit you now? He said that even if people use a knife to stab me, I will not fight back. So through his experience, we can see that people can change through practice. Their mind can change through practice. He's closer to my mother's side, so I know him very well. He used to fight a lot, and he used rocks and all different weapons that he can get his hands to. But now, after practicing Dharma, his mind gets more tamed and his temper is completely different. So Dharma practice has such power to transform a person. Therefore, we don't really need to search for lots of high teachings or profound theories. Rather, we should practice up on such grounded teachings like this text. When suffering occurs, when you encounter obstacles, do not get beaten up. Do not feel that I am hopeless. Do not feel that this is the rock bottom and feeling like to give up everything, because this kind of negative mentality would make us feel even more powerless. Therefore, we really need to find a place to rely. So that's something that we need to practice in our life. Westerners nowadays would think that Westerners usually would consider that you should not put all your eggs in one basket. If you have $1 million, you should not put all your money in one investment company. Why is that? Because you may get money from it, you may earn more money from it, or may not, because this company could claim bankruptcy, and then if you have all your money there, then you will get completely bankrupt as well. Therefore, you should put money in different places. Similarly, how we find a place of refuge, how we find a place to rely on, should not be only one place either, including relationship. And all your love should not go to only your parents or your brothers. You should not put your love to a single person, such as your mother. If your mother passed away, then everything just collapses in your world. Then there's no more place for you to rely upon, and your life would just end in such a way. Many people had never practiced. So when you lose things that matters to you, such as people you love, such as wealth, then you have no way to deal with such kind of life anymore. Because when people are going through extreme suffering, it could make them lose clear mind or clear sight. And because of that, lots of psychologists also support of this statement, or through their research they support this kind of statement, where they said that when people are at their rock bottom, their IQ just drops, and it's not a best time to make decisions. So when people are extremely angry, do not make any choices or any decisions. Otherwise, it might be a decision you would regret for your whole life. There are people who had made such regretful decisions during great anger or under affliction attack. They either stab others or cut their own wrists. A moment that you lose your right mindfulness, things that you do at that moment could be very horrifying. Of course, Buddhists should have right mindfulness, but and Buddhists are very accustomed to the practice of right mindfulness, but for mundane beings, they never had such experience of practicing so they would do all different kinds of things. I went to many different prisons to teach, and whenever I get an opportunity, I would ask them, how did you get here, and what led you to get here? There are people who would say that I was extremely angry, I killed my wife or my kids, or I killed others, and so on. But now I feel really regretful, but everything's over. There's nothing I can do at this point. Just as in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it is stated that when I am having greed or desire, anger, and so on, I should stop my mind. I should stop any speech or action and stay as a tree, how a tree would. This is in fact quite important. You should wait for your mood to calm down a bit before you make any other decisions. Also, whenever you are extremely happy, you should not make promises of giving people other things, nor should you make any decisions to whenever you're under the influence of great anger or make any other kinds of actions at all. Nowadays, there are some celebrities. Sometimes things that happens in his own home or own family went wrong, he would right away post on his social media and then feel quite regretful afterwards. Some celebrity last year did things like this, and later on they wanted to retreat or retrieve that post, and they cannot do so anymore because it is so well known by then. So when people are under the influence of great jealousy, anger, as well as other afflictions, you should try not to make any decisions at all. Otherwise, you may make decisions that really doesn't go with what you plan to. This is quite important. There is a word, a phrase in Chinese. It's called lightning marriage. It's a speedy marriage. So you get married just as a speed as lightning, and get divorced at the same speed as well. So first you meet someone right away, you want to spend your whole life with that person and get married right away. But whenever there's any kinds of afflictions or conflicts arise, you want to get divorced as well. Therefore, lots of the teachings that's given, even in the worldly sense, I think we should try to study it as well and try to maintain a natural and normal state of mind. And in order to attain such kind of natural mind, then we need to practice diligently with lots of determination, as well as practice repeatedly, so that your mind won't be so fragile and your mind would naturally open and expand more and more, so that whenever you encounter things that's harder for the non-practitioners to face, you can face it and you can persevere through it. So in such a way, it is very beneficial to you. Ashvaghosha composed a Shastra, that is Shastra of Great Ornament, and then later translated by Master Xuanzang. Within it, there was a story that a bhikshu was giving teachings. At the time, he was revered by many and offered by many as well. But at the time, there was this one person who just really doesn't like him and started to slandering about him. After a while, however, the bhikshu told his attendant and said that I am going to praise the person who doesn't like me, and I'm going to offer him some of the clothing. And the attendant doesn't understand at all and saying that no, you can't do that. He's treating you so badly and slandering a lot behind your back. And the bhikshu said that I understand that, but his slandering is very beneficial to me. It is because he's slandering, I am eliminating the 8 worldly dharmas, and I am becoming a much better practitioner. So if we were to think about the things that would happen like such in a worldly sense, I think the non-practitioners would rather be completely opposite. If people are really nice to you, you'll be happy, and if people are praising you, you're very happy about that, even if you don't have all of the merit that they are praising you about. But if you are criticized by others, if you are slandered by others, I think it would be rather very difficult for you to accept it. Even if whatever things that the others criticizing you about are true, you would still be very upset about it. Just like how it is stated in the Treasury of Aphorism, it says that other people's praises will not turn into happiness, and other people's criticism will not turn into suffering. One should abide in one's own merit, and that is the characteristic of a wise one. Of course, it is very difficult for people to actually do it. But through practice, I think the practitioners can actually attain something similar to it. Maybe at the beginning there could be a little bit suffering, and they can be very fragile.
有些人可能就是对其他的什么就是感情也好，或者说是钱财也好，或者说是名声地位等等，就是凡是世间当中。
But of course, everyone's afflictions are very different. Some have afflictions towards wealth, and some towards relationships, and some towards fame and social status. Everyone has their own shortcomings. There are people who really care about money.
有些只要不涉及到钱的话呢，我没问题，修行很好的。就是有些人是就只要不涉及到感情的话呢，我很大方的，就。
But not so much about relationships. As long as it doesn't really get to his money, he'll be fine. He has a good practice. And if there are but there are of course people who
怎么样呢？就是心要宽广，心宽广。
Who has the shortcoming, or who has rather the weak spot of having certain difficulties in relationships. So it's very different. But if you can continuously to practice, your mind will become much more broader. And if your mind becomes broader, it's through the diligent practice if you want to have such kind of mind. In Prajnaparamita Sutra, it says that if you have afflictions, wisdom cannot manifest. If wisdom cannot manifest, then all the maras and the difficulties will have the opportunities to seize you. According to the Jewel Heap Sutra, it says that as long as there's a place, as long as the people grasp onto love, there is the opportunity to there is the manifestation of greed. As long as there is a place of hate or anger, there is affliction of aggression. If there is neither love nor hate, there is ignorance. And because of all different kinds of afflictions, the mind is constantly in the state that is not natural. And because of that, many sufferings would appear. So we have to practice diligently on our mind, and I think our mind would definitely be very different if you do so. Everyone has desire, and everyone has different afflictions, but you have to believe in your own capacity. Everyone has such opportunity, and everyone has such a capacity and the capability to do so. Therefore, as long as we practice in depth with great determination and diligence, we can definitely work with our afflictions. This is really important to remember. And now the next one, it says that first let's look at how useless it is. If we can do something to solve a problem, then there's no need to worry or to be unhappy about it. If we can't, then it doesn't help to worry or to be unhappy about it either. So, if the things can be turned or can be resolved, then why worry? You have opportunity to work on it, so just change it or work on it. Or on the second one, it says that if there's no way to resolve it, it's just as if you already broke the vase and there's no way to bring it back to its original state, then why worry about it? Just as it is stated in the Bodhisattva Charivatara, where it says that if there's opportunity to resolve the problem, then why to be unhappy about it? If there's no way to resolve the problem, what's the use of being unhappy about it? So whenever you encounter anything, any adversity, try to be strong and not be so fragile and not to be so upset. Why is that? Because you can analyze it with your own wisdom and to think about it if there's any way to resolve it. If there is a way to resolve it, of course you can be a little bit upset for a short moment, but you know that it can be resolved. So you won't dwell on that bad mood. And if you can't resolve it, suffer from it, it doesn't really help in any ways. So that's one of the really sharp inference that is provided by Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and one way to practice on it. So that's the first aspect. And then the second aspect, then it says that if the enormous trouble involved, as long as we don't get anxious or irritated, then our strength of mind will enable us to bear even the hardest of suffering easily. They'll feel as flimsy, as insubstantial as cotton wool. So, as we often say, that in fact the actual event doesn't really crush you, it is the emotion that crushes you. So you have to face things with great bravery, even if it's some great adversity with lots of pain that might bring to you. However, if you have lots of bravery and strength, then whatever happens to you is just like stepping on top of very soft and flimsy cotton. It's not so substantial anymore. It's not so solid, and makes you feel claustrophobic. Rather, you feel that you can completely handle whatever is happening. In fact, there's always a way. There's always a way out. Whatever happens in your life, you have to believe that there is always a way out as long as you have a strong mind. From my personal experience, I have a very deep understanding of that. I have a very deep experience of that. I think the Westerners always like to talk about personal experiences so that it could lead to contemplation. I think from my personal experience, although I'm not saying that I am fully enlightened or I am great at practicing Tonglen, it's not that. But I personally think that in terms of practicing impermanence and practicing renunciation, I am rather a good practitioner. Every time there's any adversities happen in my life, I would try to see it from a different angle. At the end of last year, my original plan was to go to Russia, Dubai, Poland, England, and many other countries, and lots of really wonderful schools provided such great opportunities, and I was invited to those places. On one hand, to share some of my philosophy as well as my experience. So from deep of my mind, I really wanted to go, but due to many different reasons, I couldn't, and including the COVID, it was very difficult to go. I felt a little bit upset at the beginning because I prepared for a very long period of time. But then later on, I felt that if I can't, I can't. So I used that time and I started doing lots of translation, especially the the sutras that is kept or taught in Mandarin, but not in Chinese, but not in Tibetan, such as Kshitigarbha Sutra, Sutra of Filial Piety, Sutra of Ordination, and the Sigalavada Sutra, as well as Vasubandhu's Shastra of Reborn in Pure Land, and so on. So I took that time and took advantage of that spare time and translated a lot, which made my time really meaningful. From that aspect, yes, if I go to those schools, I would be happy. But if I don't go to those schools, my time was really valuable and turned out to be really good as well. Just as Mipham Rinpoche said that sometimes the adversities, sometimes the favorable conditions are disguised as adversities. At the beginning, maybe the adversity is very difficult to accept, but later on, afterwards, when you look back at that difficult period of time, you would realize, thankfully, things happened in such a way. It turned out to be very meaningful. Back in 2002, I got really ill. Also, I had some people slandering me behind my back, and many different difficulties happened at the time. So I decided to completely enter into retreat for a while. So from the end of 2001, I started translating the extensive biography of Shakyamuni Buddha, and by 12th of May, I finished translating the biography of White Lotus. Without being sick, I probably won't have the courage to translate the 500-page long Dighe version of sutra and then or text. I probably won't have such great bravery or courage, but I think it was really wonderful. During the day, I would take every drips and stay in hospital, and in the afternoon, I would do my translations. I also did lots of writing, such as a collection of Q&As of Tibetan esoteric Buddhism, as well as collected interviews of different PhDs. So many different books, and I remembered that short time of the year. In the short time of 6 months, it was in fact, really valuable. Around May the 2nd, there was a big building that's already finished building, and my translation also finished. So I think from many different aspects, it was really quite auspicious. At the time, Phuntsok Rinpoche was in Chengdu, so I went back to Chengdu after finished translation, and then we all came back to Larangar together. At the time, I felt that my life could have been over because of sickness and all the slandering and so on. I mentioned that quite a bit in my journal, that is Footprints of the Journey. I worried very much that I may not be able to finish translating the the biography of White Lotus. I may have died halfway in between. But at the time, I think it was such a great opportunity for me. Also, in 2016, my mother died. I had a big surgery. There are lots of big changes in Larangar, but I give teachings in the Lotus Sutra, in the Medicine Buddha Sutra, in Discourse on 10 Wholesome Action Sutra, and Precious Garland of Supreme Dharma, Ishi Lama, as well as Treasury of Dharma Dhatu. So many people, once that they encounter different sufferings, they probably couldn't imagine how life could go on. They feel like life is going to end right away. But I think at that time you can look, maybe there's another way around. You can walk from the side door or something, instead of thinking that you have to go this way. You don't have to be that stubborn. You can look from a different angle. In fact, people could have different kinds of sufferings. At the time, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared when you do encounter such kind of suffering. I think you can look for other meaning and other value of your life. In such a way, it is quite meaningful. So don't be so fragile, and have a big and strong heart in such a way whatever big adversity is not going to harm you even a single bit. Next one, it talks about, however, while we're dominated by anxiety, even the tiniest problem becomes extremely difficult to cope with, because we have the additional burden of mental discomfort and unhappiness. Over here, it talks about the opposite angle. It says that even when you encounter even the tiniest pain, but this kind of pain could make you feel that, oh, I have so much pain, what do I do? And by thinking in such a way, you're actually adding more into that unhappiness, which could eventually crush you at the end. So big or small pain really depends on how you feel, and depends on your own strength of mind. Sometimes I found that I would give you teachings in class, but maybe I have no such intention of criticizing people, but there are listeners who feel that, oh, Khenpo's criticizing me. And there are people who would take it very seriously, and everyone's reaction of my teaching is very different. So the pain or suffering is very different. And how they would categorize the big pain from the small pain is very different. It all depends on the capacity of their mind. In Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says that when you are encountering when you are suffering from afflictions, even the smallest pain will be enlarged, just like a crow is much more powerful in front of a dead snake. So when we look at our mind, I think the sentient beings are suffering a lot because they think they're suffering a lot, but in fact they don't know that the pain is really not that strong. Before they wear out their karma, their habitual pattern, they would continuously to feel that the pain is very strong. So it's very important for everyone to study how to transform suffering into enlightenment or onto the path. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about how misery is fortune in disguise. In fact, there's a story in Chinese that says that there's a herdsman who lost his horse, and the neighbor came by and tried to console him, saying that don't be upset about it. In fact, he had quite a big heart, and he said it's okay. You never know if it's a good thing or bad. After a few years, his horse came back along with a small pony, and the neighbor came by to congratulate him, saying that it's a wonderful thing. But he said, well, it's not necessarily a good thing. And then after a few days, his son was riding the little pony and fell off the horse and broke his leg. The neighbor came by saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your son broke his leg." But then later, because his son broke his leg, his son doesn't have to go to the war anymore. So because of his son got injured, he saved his life. Therefore, sometimes we can see that bad things or misfortune could really be fortune or good luck in disguise. Same as practitioners, that's how we should view our life. When you have fame, it may not be very good for you. When you have money, it may not be good for you because it could all of them could give you make you feel more arrogant about yourself. Similarly, without money may not be a bad thing because it could help you to generate genuine renunciation. Therefore, whatever happens, I think as a practitioner, we will be able to see the good side of it and we'll be able to accept anything that happens in life. Just as how some psychologists think that there are two ways of thinking. One is growth mentality and the other one is stagnate mentality. The growth usually people would have the mentality of saying that you have to attain something, otherwise you're a failure. But the growth mentality would see that, well, if you didn't get a good grade, then take it as an experience of learning so that next time you can do better. And you will learn a lot from the experience of not doing well in this exam. I think practitioners should learn from that. We should be ready for all kinds of changes in our life, and we should always be ready to learn from our experiences, whatever happens in our life. So over here, it is over here. Then it says that imagine, for example, trying to get rid of desire and attachment for someone we find attractive, while continuing to dwell on their attractive qualities. It would all be in vain. Because at that time your mind is concentrating on the state where your mind is suffering, and in that way it's very hard to endure. It means that when you're having this desire and attachment, that's already afflictions. And when you have such afflictions already and then you focus on the object of affliction, then whatever you're trying would be in vain, because so in such a way, if you keep thinking that, oh, I'm in pain, and this is such bad luck, and so on, your mind is focusing on that negative aspect, or your mind is focusing on the aspect that is attacked by afflictions. Therefore, your mind will be very difficult to endure it. Just as yesterday we talked about how if we continuously to familiarize ourselves with the mind of suffering, then naturally suffering will continuously to grow. That's just the nature of it. In just the same way, if we concentrate only the pain brought by suffering, we'll never be able to develop endurance or the ability to bear it. As in the instruction called the sealing doors of senses, don't latch onto all kinds of mind-made concepts about your suffering. Learn instead to leave the mind undisturbed in its own natural state. Bring the mind home, rest there, and let it find its own ground. I think this is really important. It is normally because people's mind is not at a natural state that is at home. because their mind is not at home, they would take up extreme actions such as committing suicide or self-harm. If the mind is at its natural state and undisturbed, even the biggest suffering occurs in your life, it would be very difficult for it to harm you. This is quite important. When desire occurs or aggression occurs, those are all deluded thoughts. Those are all are the wrong thoughts, are the deluded thinking, which makes us suffer so much. So mind naturally has two states. One is peace and calm in the relative state. In such a state, you can carry out your action, and whatever you do would be reasonable and would be rather acceptable. So you should make sure your mind stays in that natural state and carry out your actions. I don't think Buddhists would commit suicide or things that's just really extreme like such. When people's mind are very disturbed, all different kinds of evil spirits have the opportunities to take over your mind. Many people wanted to commit suicide. When their mind is so disturbed, then the Maras would be coming to guide you, saying that you will be happier after you commit suicide, and so on. That is why when people are about to commit suicide, they would post in social media saying that I am going to die, which is the better place for me to be, and I'm going to depart this world, and I'm sure after I die everything would be much better, and then they would jump into the water and commit suicide. So usually, and sometimes it is because of the guidance of Maras, and people didn't do it completely willingly. Therefore, you should supplicate to the Guru as well as the three jewels. Otherwise, as a Buddhist, if you have all different kinds of afflictions, it's really not that great. Now, the next one is also extremely important. Not only you shouldn't think that I don't want suffering. You should be happy when suffering comes. You should think that, oh, I'm so lucky. I am having a bad mood day. I have afflictions. That's really wonderful. I'm quite irritated today. That's wonderful. So practitioners is very unusual in such a way compared to the mundane people, to the non-practitioners, because to the non-practitioners, those are the things that's extremely difficult for them to deal with or to face. But for practitioners, they would treat such kind of adversity as if they're stepping on soft cotton, such as the worldly people would feel great suffering if their parents died, or if they feel that they're bankrupted and so on. But practitioners, they all have a way to deal with it. Of course, you have to continuously to familiarize yourself again and again with great diligence and to continuously open up your own mind. If you cannot do that, then suffering would be suffering and practice would be practice. Doesn't matter if you've already get ordained for years. People would say that I am the lineage, I'm from so-and-so lineage, I've practiced for 20 years. If you practice for 20 years, but your mind is not emerged with the Dharma, it's just as it is stated in the aphorism of water and wood. It says that even if you soak rocks in water for 100 years, the rock won't be wet. So it is quite important to change your own mind stream. You have to of course, this kind of change doesn't take a long period of time, but it has to be very effective because you need to practice diligently and wholeheartedly. That's the way to maximize the strength of your practice. This is quite crucial. If you don't practice diligently, if the efficiency of your practice is not that strong, just simply saying that you chanted so and so mantra and stayed in so and so centers, then whenever afflictions happen, it's just like you're non-practitioners. There's a military school. People came out from that military school, graduated from there, are extremely brave. Whatever battle they went to, they're really brave. I think in the battlefield of practitioners, if you practice well, you will be extremely brave in front of all of the sufferings or pain that occurs in front of you. If you only listen to classes if you only listen to the class but waste your life and waste your time, I think it is not really useful. And by simply listening to it, it's not very effective and not efficient. Without such efficiency, you're only getting the merit of listening to Mahayana Dharma, but there's really no practical solutions for your life or to face those afflictions. So I really hope everyone could face suffering. I really hope that you can be really strong in the actual actions. If you're only talking about, I need to be strong, this is not enough. You really have to put it into your practice. You really have to familiarize yourself with the teachings that's stated here. And I truly think that everyone has the potential and everyone has such capacity. The key is whether you can familiarize yourself with your practice. The Buddha said also, I am giving you the teaching of the path of liberation, but liberation is completely depending on yourself. To transform happiness and suffering onto the path, I think I myself have some genuine experiences, because if I have not practiced it when I was young, I don't think you will be attending my classes. Therefore, I think all of you who's listening to it, you definitely spend a lot of time in studying it, in studying the Dharma. I really hope that you try to make this period of time very efficient, to put whatever you've listened into actual practice, into actual familiarization into your daily life, and in such a way you will gain benefit. And once you gain the benefit from such teachings, you can practice it on your own and you can share it with others, and all such kind of then such kind of teaching will have strength. It will create influence. It's just as in Mahayana teaching, there's peace instructions. But if peace instructions is only on word, then peace instructions is peace instruction, and you are you, and there's a huge gap in between it. Therefore, I hope that you do not grasp only onto the words, but you should take all of the words into your heart. And we'll stop here today.
Sonam dai tamche zubanya tonani be jana panshi jirga nanji ranlong chibai chibum tsonin jova